Shabbat Shalom. Let us begin with the blessing for studying Torah, although I'll ask everyone to please mute themselves and share your blessing without everyone hearing it. And here it is. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. Okay, so just before we start reading some Joshua, vous êtes ici, bonjour. She got on. Okay, good. So anybody remember where we left off last time for Joshua? I mean, I know what chapter, I'm just what happened. Yeah, Lynn.
Oh, never mind.
Do you want to just give us a little summary or a little highlight from last time?
That's not what I was going to do, but I think it was just one guy, I don't remember if he was named or not, had taken some booty, I guess, and got in trouble for it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't remember his name either, but yeah.
And then they lost at, I didn't know how you pronounce it, AI.
Yeah.
How do you pronounce that?
Yeah.
Or whatever. I guess as a result of that, I don't know if I'm remembering that.
No, that's great. That's great. So they conquered Jericho, right? They circled Jericho 7 times with the ark and all of that. Then they blew the shofar and the walls came tumbling down, right? And then they didn't do so well at the next one. And yes, as you said, one of these guys did a bad, Achan, his name was. Kept some booty for himself, which you're not allowed to do when you're told to destroy it all, committed to cherem, and everybody got punished, right? Because it's all sort of community punishment and community responsibility. And if I'm correct, Lynn, we are up to chapter 8. Is that correct?
Yeah, starting chapter 8,
yes.
Right.
Okay.
All right. And the Lord said unto Joshua, fear not, neither be thou dismayed. Take all the people of war with thee, and arise, go up to Al. See, I have given into thy hand the king of Ai, and his people, and his city, and his land. And thou shalt do to Ai and her king as thou didst unto Jericho and her king. Only the spoil thereof and the cattle thereof shall ye take for a prey unto yourselves. Lay thee an ambush for the city behind it.
Okay, so let me just point out that in this case, they're allowed to take some of the stuff, right? They aren't being required to destroy all of it. Okay, so that's different from before. Also, God says, don't worry, right? It's all going to be cool. I'm going to give you this land. But God also suggests that they lie in ambush. In other words, they're going to surprise the people they're attacking. So there is some, human, planning and strategy here in addition to whatever God's going to do. Okay, please keep going.
So Joshua arose and all the people of war to go up against Ai, and Joshua chose out 30,000 mighty men of valor and sent them away by night. And he commanded them, saying, behold, ye shall lie in wait against the city, even behind the city. Go not very far from the city, but be ye all ready. And I and all the people that are with me will approach unto the city, and it shall come to pass when I come out against us, as at the first, that we will flee before them. For they will come out after us till we have drawn them from the city, for they will say, they flee before us, as at the first, therefore we will flee before them. Then ye shall rise up from the ambush and seize upon the city, for the Lord your God will deliver it unto your hand. And it shall be, when ye have taken the city, that ye shall set the city on fire. According to the commandment of the Lord shall ye do. See, I have commanded you. Joshua therefore sent them forth, and they went to lie in ambush and abode between Bethel and Ai, on the west side of Ai. But Joshua lodged that night among the people. And Joshua rose up early in the morning and numbered the people, and went up, he and the elders of Israel, before the people to Ai. And all the people, even the people of war that they were with him, went up and drew nigh and came before the city and pitched on the north side of Ai. Now there was a valley between them and Ai. And he took about 5,000 men and set them to lie in ambush between Bethel and Ai on the west side of the city. And when they had set the people, even all the host that was on the north of the city, and their liers in wait on the west of the city, Joshua went that night into the midst of the valley. And it came to pass, when the king of Ai saw it, that they hasted and rose up early, and the men of the city went out against Israel to battle, he and all his people, at a time appointed before the plain. But he wist not that there were liers in ambush against him behind the city. And Joshua and all Israel made as if they were beaten before them, and fled by the way of the wilderness. And all the people that were in Ai were called together to pursue after them, and they pursued after Joshua, and were drawn away from the city. And there was not a man left in Ai or Bethel that went not out after Israel, and they left the city open and pursued after Israel. And the Lord said unto Joshua, stretch out the spear that is in thy hand towards Ai, for I will give it to thine hand. And Joshua stretched out the spear that he had in his hand towards the city. And the ambush arose quickly out of the place. They ran as soon as he had stretched out his hand, and they entered into the city and took it, and hasted it, and set the city on fire. And when the men of Ai looked behind them, they saw, and behold, the smoke of the city ascended up to heaven, and they had no power to flee this way or that way. And the people that fled to the wilderness turned back upon the pursuers. And when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city, and the smoke of the city ascended, then they turned again and slew the men of Ai. And all the other issued out of the city against them. So they were in the midst of Israel, some on this side, some on that side, and they smote them so that they let none of them remain or escape. And the king of Ai they took alive and brought him to Joshua.
Okay, let's just stop there for a bit. Thank you. Just a couple things to notice is that Joshua has this like javelin or some sort of sword that he's supposed to point towards the city and back. And that's kind of reminiscent of when, remember when Moses was leading the battle, you know, with his staff, when his arms were up, they won. When his, I'm knocking things over. And when his arm was down, they would lose. And another thing to notice is that when Jericho was taken, it was purely by a miracle, right? That God made this miracle happen. I involves both, you know, God performing some kind of miracle, or at least, you know, telling them, you know, no matter what, you're going to win. But it also took some ingenuity on the part of the army, you know, I mean, they not only ambushed them, but they also pretended to lose, right? They pretended to lose, and then they turned around and got them. Another thing is that the city itself is being burnt, but a lot of people, it said, left their villages and farms and things. And so those were not destroyed. And they're there for Israel to take advantage of, you know, once the inhabitants are all gone. Then obviously you're not going to burn everything in the country because there won't be any way to live, right? You have to have food. So you know, the area that was promised by God, and, you know, that you'll have farms and you'll have all kinds of things, those are going to be left alone. There's something about the word emek, which is in one of the verses, which is the depths, or a valley. And the rabbis interpret this to mean that Joshua engaged in Torah study, you know, deeply, like we say, la'asok b'divrei Torah. We are, you know, burying ourselves in the words of Torah. So they say that since there's this reference to a depth, that actually Joshua engaged in Torah study, which he hadn't done before. Remember, he was blamed by the rabbis for not having engaged in Torah study, and that's why they lost the last battle. Don't ask, it's very far-fetched. I know, Stacey, you're looking like, Yeah, they want to emphasize the importance of Torah studies. They're going to find a way to say these guys, listen, they said that Esau and Jacob, that Esau was he was a hunter and Jacob was a tent dweller. And for the rabbis, tent dweller means that he was studying in yeshivas.
Mm.
Yeah. So they need to make their point and they'll use whatever they need. That's fine. All right. Who would like to read starting from 24?
Whoops.
Susie, are you reading?
Yeah. Okay. When Israel had finished slaughtering all the inhabitants of Ai in the open wilderness where they pursued them, and when all of them to the very last had fallen by the edge of the sword, all Israel returned to Ai and attacked it with the edge of the sword. The total of those who fell that day, both men and women, was 12,000, all the people of Ai. For Joshua did not draw back his hand, with which he stretched out the sword until he had utterly destroyed all the inhabitants of Ai. Only the livestock and the spoil of that city, Israel took as their booty, according to the word of the Lord that he had issued to Joshua.
Yeah. So, the livestock, that's how they're going to be able to eat and work the land and all of that stuff. Yeah.
So Joshua burned Ai and made it forever a heap of ruins, as it is to this day. And he hanged the king of Ai on a tree until evening. And at sunset, Joshua commanded, and they took his body down from the tree, threw it down at the entrance of the gate of the city, and raised over it a great heap of stones, which stands there to this day.
Okay, let me just say that, so this also, you may remember in the story of Purim, that there's Haman and Haman's sons hanging, but they take them down at a certain point. Even though these are theoretically really bad people, they are made in God's image. And you don't want the body to be desecrated, and it belongs to God. It's supposed to reflect God, and so you have to show some measure of respect for the body. So you don't hang it beyond. I mean, you don't let it hang beyond a certain time.
Suzanne?
Yeah.
Yeah, just have I'm using the Jewish Study Bible, and it's interesting that verse 29 says the king of Ai was impaled on a stake.
Oh, right. You know
Right.
what? That's interesting.
And
I
I'm
read something about. I can find. Go ahead.
yeah, and the notation off to the side just said that he was taken alive, impaled on a stake, a common treatment of a vanquished ruler in the ancient Near East. But then the rest is the same, that the corpse was then taken down and stones were put over it. But it was interesting that his death is described differently.
Yeah, you know what? I remember reading something about that too. So now I'm looking in one of these books to see if.
And I don't know if that's significant or not, but I just.
Not only, Rabbi, was he impaled on a pole till eventide. I have author's version. When the sun was setting, Joshua gave orders, and they took his corpse down from the pole and they flung it. So that's not really respectful, is it?
No, it
Flung
really
it
isn't.
by the entrance of the town gate. And then they
Okay, yeah, I have a note here that says, so it's the account of the death of the city's king follows verse 29. First, the king was killed, then his body was hung on a tree. And then there's a footnote, this may have been impalement, but 1026 suggests the king had first been killed. Anyway, so he was either impaled or hung. There was a pole, but I guess it's not clear which one it is. That's why there are different
So much
interpretations.
violence.
Yeah,
Gory.
yeah. And flinging the body isn't such a nice thing to do either, is it? Okay, thanks for pointing that out. I did once, I went to Romania a number of years ago to do some volunteer work. And we went to visit the castle of Vlad the Impaler, and they, described how he would sit there eating meals while people were being impaled. It was like,
Oh,
okay, that sounds like a great way to have dinner. Okay, Stacy, any other comments before we go on? Because now we've got a renewal of the pledge that the people are going to make.
I was just wondering if that, putting the stones above it, if the Jewish tradition.
Yeah, I think in this case, it's just to bury the body so that, it's not lying there, rotting and being eaten by animals. Yeah, because when they threw it overboard, it's like, oy.
that,
Okay, we're at 30 now, I think.
okay.
Yeah.
Then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel. Just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of unhewn stones on which no iron tool has been used. And they offered it on it burnt offerings to the Lord and sacrificed offerings of well-being.
Okay, hang on just 1 second. Okay. This is what I was thinking about last time when Jason brought up the whole business about something being out of sequence in terms of time.
Wow.
So the altar, supposedly, I think in an earlier place, it said that they built an altar right after they crossed the Jordan, but they're building it here after they've made a couple of conquests. And so the Jewish commentary says there's no before or after in the Torah or in the Bible. So therefore, don't worry about it. Even though it was supposed to be built much earlier. You're not smiling, Jason.
Shall I go on?
Yeah, I just want to point that out here because the sequence is wrong. If you were to believe what they're saying to you in other places. Yeah.
Well, didn't we say that some of this history is clearly not accurate anyway?
Oh, yeah.
In terms, because things that happened, centuries earlier or later.
Yes. Oh, okay. Let me just read you something about the body hanging. Now, this is the art scroll. This is the art scroll commentary. So about the body. To allow a body to hang overnight is an affront to God, in whose image man is created. Of course, that's how they say man. Now, actually, the translation in this one is, he hanged the king of Ai on the gallows. Which is even different from all the other ones. So anyway, to allow a body to hang overnight is an affront to God, in whose image man is created. This applies even to a wicked criminal, the sort of person who is liable to the death penalty, indicates the lofty stature of every human being. But as you pointed out, then taking the body and flinging it, is not really very respectful.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Can I ask you a favor?
Yeah.
Could you just let me know when you want to not share the screen so you can
course.
talk? Okay,
Of
cool.
course. Yes, I will definitely do that. Okay, so now we're going to hear the blessings and the curses. The altar of unhewn stone. Yeah, I wanted to mention that. Let's see, where was that comment? Keep reading, I'll find it.
It's 31.
Yeah, no, I'm looking for the comment in here.
Oh.
Yeah, but, oh yeah, here, yeah. Let's see. Well, I'll read you the whole thing. You can stop sharing for a sec. Thank you. So this is about the blessings and the curses on the mountain, on the twin mountains. Joshua brought the people to Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, which are north of Shechem, where he assembled them all to carry out the command given by Moses in Deuteronomy. Now remember, this happened in Deuteronomy too, that the blessings and the curses were said on these two mountains. So we're doing this again. There, as Moses instructed, Joshua erected an altar, inscribed the Torah, and had the Kohanim and the senior Levites proclaim the series of 12 blessings and curses listed there. This elaborate ritual constituted a new acceptance of the Torah and allegiance to its giver. So in other words, we're recreating this pledge that, yes, this is our Torah, this is our constitution, this is our God, we're going to follow this path. And in order to, kind of sign the contract, we're going to issue these blessings and curses like the Israelites did in Deuteronomy. Okay, Rashi and Radak, citing the sages, agree that the events described here took place on the day Israel crossed the Jordan, many weeks before the victories over Jericho and Ai. I mean, obviously, that would have made more sense for them to pledge their allegiance to God and to accept the Torah when they entered the land of Canaan rather than afterwards, right? So they're saying that's when they did it. Since these mountains are over 40 miles from the Jordan, it was miraculous for the nation to have been able to do so. The commandment to go to the Twin Mountains before anything else alludes to a principle of Jewish history, that miraculous and even apparently natural triumphs and successes are entirely an outgrowth of Israel's allegiance to the Torah. So in other words, the only way they could have won is because they had pledged their allegiance to the Torah. That these events are recorded so long after they actually took place is not uncommon. In the line with the principle, Ein Mukdam ve'ein mehuchar b'Torah. The Torah is not necessarily written in chronological order. The question remains, however, that when the order is not chronological, there must be some other logic that dictates the order in which the events are recorded. Otherwise, why were they not written as they occurred? According to Lev Aharon, the author of this book preferred to write them in geographical order. That's a really neat trick. Since the events are not recorded in chronological order, there must be a reason that they're said in this mishmash. Well, it's geographical. So from east to west, so you start with Gilgal to Jericho, then to Ai, and finally to the Twin Mountains. So they couldn't have first gone to the Twin Mountains and then come back and conquer those cities. Alternatively, the prophet preferred to tell about Jericho and Ai to show that even though there were Canaanite cities between the Jordan and the mountains, no one dared impede Israel's march through the land to Gerizim and Ebal. So in other words, there's some logic that is not chronological. Okay, I don't know if that's a very satisfactory answer, but there you have it. Okay, Stacy, you may start sharing again. I'm sorry to keep interrupting, Susie. Okay, we're on verse
32.
Yeah.
And there, in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written. All Israel, alien as well as citizens, with their elders and officers and their judges, stood on opposite sides of the ark in front of the Levitical priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, half of them in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded at the first that they should bless the people of Israel. And afterward, he read all the words of the law, blessings and curses, according to all that is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses commanded that Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, and the women and the little ones and the aliens who resided among them.
Great. Okay, so as you see, there's this renewal of the pledge, and thank you, Stacy. The women are included here. That we're not so sure they were included at Mount Sinai. Because it said, it said the men needed to separate themselves from the women. They should not, sully themselves before this, very important event. But here, the women are there, which is a nice thing to see, right? A renewed pledge, including women. Maybe they've made some advances since they spent 40 years in the desert. Okay, anybody have any questions or comments before we go on to the next chapter? I mean, this is a good book if you like, war maneuvers.
Reminds me of the movie Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah, really, really.
I have a quick question about
Dan.
the dating. So these events are thought to have occurred sometime between 2000 and 1000 BCE.
No, it's
Or-
the 13th century BCE, like in the 1200s.
It's 1200. So, okay, so it's closer to 1000. So this is into the Iron Age, talking about iron implements. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. Well, good question. I'm glad. I wouldn't know that it was necessarily the Iron Age, but that's great that you know that. Okay, any other questions or comments?
Is there archaeological evidence for these places?
I believe that Ai was destroyed way before, or flattened or whatever, way before they arrived, and Jericho as well. So there is a little teeny bit of evidence of people coming here around this, 1200 or so BCE. And there's something called the Stela of Murnapath that lists, I think they're called Hebrews in the Stela. And there was something going on around this time. So there is a little bit of evidence of something happening, but whether these descriptions are anything close to reality, I doubt it. There's not a lot of evidence for this period. Okay, Stacy, let's go to chapter 9. There, oh, she's already got it. Great. Okay, who would like to start reading? By the way, you see listed here the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Those are the people we're supposed to destroy in this story. But they don't exist anymore. And according to the Talmud, as I mentioned last time, they don't exist anymore. Therefore, this mandate to kill them is null and void.
I'll
Okay.
read, Rabbi.
Oh,
Okay.
do you want to read?
Go ahead, Ruth, if you want to. Fine, I'll go after you.
Well, the only problem is my computer may go out. I'll read as long as I can. When all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country and in the lowland, all along the coast of the Great Sea toward Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites heard of this. They gathered together with one accord to fight Joshua and Israel. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they on their part acted with cunning. They went and prepared provisions, took worn out sacks for their donkeys, wineskins worn out and torn and mended, with worn out patched sandals on their feet and worn out clothes, and all their provisions were dry and moldy. They went to Joshua in the camp of Gilgal and said to him and to the Israelites, "We have come from a far country, so now make a treaty with us." But the Israelites said to the Hivites, "Perhaps you live among us, then how can we make a treaty with you?" They said to Joshua, "We are your servants." And Joshua said to them, "Who are you and where do you come from?" They said to him, "Your servants have come from a very far country, because the name of the Lord your God, for we have heard a report of him and of all that he did in Egypt, and of all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, King Sihon of Heshbon and King Og of Bashan, who live in Ashtaroth. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our country said to us, 'Take provisions in your hand for the journey. Go to meet them and say to them, we are your servants. Come now, make a treaty with us. Here is our bread. It was still warm when we took it from our houses as our food for the journey on the day we set out to come to you. But now see, it is dry and moldy. These wineskins were new when we filled them, and see, they are burst, and these garments and sandals are ours, are worn out from the very long journey. So the leaders partook of their provisions and did not ask direction from the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them, guaranteeing their lives by treaty. And the leaders of the congregation swore an oath to them. But when 3 days had passed, after they had made a treaty with them, they heard that they were their neighbors and were living among them. So the Israelites set out and reached their cities on the third day. Now their cities were Gibeon, Shephirah, Beeroth, and Kinath Jearim.
Thank you. Okay, let's stop there for a moment and you can stop sharing for a minute. So what are these people doing, do you think, these Gibeonites? What is all this sort of, I mean, there's a lot of detail here about their worn out sandals and their worn out wineskins and their moldy bread and all of that stuff.
They're working hard to become, to work with the Israelites, but we don't know.
But they're also pretending to be poor so that the Israelites won't advance up to their city and find out that they're not poor. I mean, they're presenting a facade. And I think the message is something like, you should make peace with us because it's really not worth it for you to come and visit, It reminds me of when Queen Elizabeth I, she would visit her country, her kingdom, and people would pay her not to come because after the whole entourage went through your castle, you didn't have anything left, So I think it's a very good front.
Well, you know what? Those are really great theories. But actually what they're doing here, and the little sort of hint is the last line we read, which is that they were actually neighbors. So they actually are neighbors. They actually are Canaanites. And they're pretending that they are coming from very far away so that they won't be killed by the Israelites. Because the Israelites are supposed to kill all the Canaanites, right? And get rid of them, across a particular geographical area. Right. But these guys are pretending that they live far away and they're not a Canaanite. And so therefore it's okay to make peace with them. So basically they're tricking Joshua and Joshua's people, as you'll see. So they're tricking them into believing that they are from far away. And so they go through this elaborate thing of, look at our moldy bread and our torn sandals. And we've been traveling, for so long. And because the understanding is that it's because we're from so far away. And so the Israelites can't kill them and they have to make a peace treaty with them. Now they're going to find out that, hey, guess what? I mean, they just found it out because they just found out that they're neighbors. So what are they going to do about this problem? They've just made a peace treaty with people they're supposed to be killing. And yet your oath is your word and you can't really break that, right? So let's see what they end up doing. Stacy, if we could see the rest of it. Thank you. Okay. So the Israelites didn't attack them. Yeah, okay. Where are we? 18. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to pick that up there, Jane?
Yeah, sure. But the Israelites did not attack them because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Then all the congregation murmured against the leaders. But all the leaders said to all the congregation, we have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we must not touch them. This is what we will do to them. We will let them live so that wrath may not come upon us because of the oath that we swore to them. The leaders said to them, let them live. So they became hewers of wood and drawers of water for all the congregation, as the leaders had decided concerning them. Joshua summoned them and said to them, why did you deceive us, saying, we are very far from you? while in fact you're living among us. Now, therefore, you are cursed, and some of you shall always be slaves, hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God. They answered Joshua, because it was told to your servants for a certainty that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you. So we were in great fear for our lives because of you and did this thing. And now we are in your hand. Do it as it seems good and right in your sight to do to us. This is what he did for them. He saved them from the Israelites, and they did not kill them. But on that day, Joshua made them hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord, to continue to this day in the place he should choose.
Thank you. Okay, you can stop sharing. So the Joshua, who tricked the people from Ai and the nations that united, now gets tricked. That seems to be what happens in the Bible. You get back what you put out. But I want to read you something in this Art Scroll edition, because this is the sort of Orthodox view and traditional view. And it's the subject of offers of peace, which seems to contradict what's going on here. It's forbidden to declare war against any nation without first offering to make peace. And this applied even to the 7 Canaanite nations. Did you notice any offers of peace?
No.
No, I didn't either. Anybody else notice? There were no offers of peace made. And then here are these guys who say, let's, please don't, kill us. And they're only, agreeing not to kill them because they made an oath, but not because they negotiated a peace treaty. So here it says, we're always supposed to offer peace first. And that's from the war code in Deuteronomy. Accordingly, before Israel crossed the Jordan, Joshua sent 3 messages to the Canaanite kingdoms. 1, they were free to evacuate the land and they would not be harmed. 2, if they wish to remain, they must accept the following terms. Keep the 7 Noahide laws of universal morality. The Noahide laws are basically, the covenant that God made with people generally, not just with the Jews, after the flood. And this is supposed to be, you don't kill, just basic laws of morality. So they're supposed to keep the 7 Noahide laws, pay taxes, and perform national service. 3, if they refuse to leave or accept the terms of peace, they would face total war. The Girgashite nation accepted the first choice and migrated to Africa. Again, it's, speculation on the part of the rabbis. All the other Canaanite nations rejected Joshua's overture. The Gibeonites were included among the rejectionists, but later they had a change of heart. Mistakenly, they thought that it was too late to accept Joshua's second alternative and remain at peace in Eretz Israel, so they devised an elaborate ruse to deceive Joshua and the leaders of Israel. And that's according to Rambam, which is Maimonides. So we want to think well of our ancestors, that they didn't just attack, that they offered terms of peace. But if that's the case, there certainly is no indication that that actually happened. And any comments or questions about this chapter before we move on? Okay, Stacy, chapter 10. Okay, who'd like to read chapter 10?
I'll read, Rabbi.
Okay.
When King Adonizedek,
which means
Thank you.
the Lord of righteousness.
I thought
justice.
Adonai, okay. Of Jerusalem heard how Joshua had taken Ai and had utterly destroyed it, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them. He became greatly frightened because Gibeon was a large city, like one of the royal cities, and was larger than Ai, and all its men were warriors. So King Adonai-Zedek of Jerusalem sent a message to King Hoham of Hebron, to King Piram of Jarmuth, to King Japhia of Lachish, and to King Debir of Eglon, saying, "Come up and help me, and let us attack Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and with the Israelites." Then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon, gathered their forces and went up with all their armies and camped against Gibeon and made war against it. And the Gibeonites sent to Joshua at the camp in Gilgal, saying, "Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us, for all the kings of the Amorites who live in the hill country are gathered against us." So Joshua went up from Gilgal, he and all the fighting force with him, all the mighty warriors. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not fear them, for I have handed them over to you. Not one of them shall stand before you." So Joshua came upon them suddenly, having marched up all night from Gilgal. And the Lord threw them into a panic before Israel, who inflicted a great slaughter on them at Gibeon, chased them by the way of the ascent of Beth-horon, and struck them down as far as Azekah and Makkedah. As they fled before Israel while they were going down the slope of Beth-horon, the Lord threw down large, huge stones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died because of the hailstones than the Israelites killed with the sword. On the day when the Lord gave.
Can you stop it 1 second? So
Sure.
this is how the rabbis interpret the hailstorm. Remember where else we saw a hailstorm? Where was there hail? Nobody, Lynn, you know where the hail was. Come on, come on, come on. Nobody knows where there was hail?
Egypt.
Yes, thank you. One of the plagues of Egypt, right? Think about all the little cotton puffs that we use to pretend it's hail. So according to the rabbis, Moses held up his arm at one point to stop the hail from coming down. And this is that same hail that's coming down now to help Joshua win the battle. Another far-fetched theory, but hey. Okay. You may continue if you'd like, Stacy.
Sure. On the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the Israelites, Joshua spoke to the Lord, and he said in the sight of Israel, "Sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Aijalon." And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jashar? The sun stopped in mid-heaven and did not hurry to set it for about a whole day. There has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord heeded a human voice, for the Lord fought for Israel.
Okay,
Then
so
Joshua
let me just, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to
No,
mention
sorry.
something here. Why do you think, if you were a rabbi of the, let's say, first few hundred years of the Common Era, why do you think Joshua stopped the sun and the moon? As I said, if you were a rabbi, I'm not saying this is easy to guess. I'm just throwing it out there.
To show the power of the, to show the power
There's
of
definitely showing the
God.
power. Yes, definitely. That's definitely part of it.
And weren't these kind of events very scary to the people?
Oh, I'm sure they were.
terrified.
Sure,
The
that would be,
eclipses of
sure,
the sun and the moon.
sure.
Did it have anything to do with them revering the moon and the sun?
Oh, that could be. That could be. I mean, all these answers are perfectly, legitimate. The one I love.
Does it sort of encourage the idea of prayer as something we can do and have the effects be powerful?
Huh. It could. I mean, I think all of these are very plausible. The one I love that I read in this Stone edition is, or the Art Scroll, is that it was Friday afternoon. And if they had kept going, they would have desecrated Shabbat by having to fight during Shabbat. So they stopped the sun. Yeah, let's stop sharing for a second, and then Stacy, I see you. Yeah. So in other words, it was Friday afternoon, and if they had kept on fighting, it would have interfered with Shabbat. So the sun stood still until they got their work done, and then they could celebrate Shabbat. Okay, Stacy.
What is the book of Jashar?
It's a book that they say, you know, probably existed, but they don't really know, you know. Occasionally there's a reference like that in the Bible to something that, you know, must have been around at the time, but Yashar means straight. So it's probably some book of like ethics or something like that, but yeah. I just love these, you know, crazy rabbinic interpretations, you know, it was Shabbat. That's of course.
But that one made a lot of sense.
Well, it makes sense if it were actually Friday afternoon. We don't know what day of the week. And also notice that Joshua, you know, follows through on his commitment to the Gibeonites. You know, the Gibeonites need help. He goes, he doesn't bask in his victory. You know, he doesn't lie back on his laurels. He keeps going. Okay, so where were we? 15? Yeah. Do you want to keep going, Stacy?
I think somebody else wanted to read.
Sandy?
Yeah, I did. Then Joshua returned and all Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal. Meanwhile, these 5 kings fled and hid themselves in the cave of Makkedah. And it was told Joshua, the 5 kings have been found hidden in the cave at Makkedah. Joshua said, roll huge, large stones against them, against the mouth of the cave, and set men by it to guard them. But do not stay there yourselves. Pursue your enemies and attack them from the rear. Do not let them enter their towns, for the Lord your God has given them into your hand. When Joshua and the Israelites had finished inflicting a very great slaughter on them until they were wiped out, and when the survivors had entered into the fortified towns, all the people returned to Joshua in the camp of Makkedah. No one dared speak against any of the Israelites. Then Joshua said, open the mouth of the cave and bring those 5 kings out to me from the cave. They did so and brought the 5 kings out to him from the cave. The king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. And when they brought the kings out to Joshua, Joshua summoned all the Israelites and said to the chiefs of the warriors who had gone with him, come near and put your feet on the necks of these kings. Then they came near and put their feet on their necks.
Okay.
And Joshua
Stop
said,
just one sec. I would just want to mention something about the foot on the neck, because this has horrible resonance with George Floyd.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, because apparently putting your foot on the neck of somebody was a symbolic gesture by victors, and it's attested to elsewhere in Egypt and Assyria. So, you know, when you think about what that guy did, Chauvin, to George Floyd, it's almost like it's almost like a memory that's implanted in our amygdala or something about how to show that you are victorious. And, you know, that the whole attitude and the whole way he did it, just, you know, somehow this just really, you know, struck me when I read it. I'm sure it strikes you as well. You know, although I did read somewhere that apparently that particular way of holding somebody down was in their police procedures. It's like, oh my God.
They're supposed to do it on their head, not on their neck. They're supposed to hold, you know, it's a different, they messed up the technique, but you know, the guy was an evil person anyway.
Yeah.
Much violence in the Torah.
But, you know, that's why, can you stop sharing for a second? Thanks. That's why, you know, in Leviticus 18, where it says, you know, 2 men lying together the way a man lies with a woman is forbidden. Well, you can look at that as a power issue, right? as we know, we've been reading about this, when there's a war, you get the booty, and a lot of times you get to rape the women. And that shows a certain kind of power, just the same way as putting your foot on the neck of a man. It's a way to assert your power. And so, these are clearly really awful things. I don't know where this technique came from for the police in Minnesota, but it just seems like it harks back to this sort of thing.
We had a rabbi.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
We had a speaker at Osher several weeks ago, and he's an ex-policeman. And they got into quite an argument with one of the Osher members. It wasn't a very pleasant argument, but basically he said what that officer did, no matter how horrifying it is, he did exactly as he was trained to do.
That's what I had read.
He was literally following orders. Yeah. I did not realize that because I thought it was his own initiative.
Right. I read that was supposedly a technique, but something about that technique, or the chokehold where Eric Garner got killed. I mean, it just, if somebody can't breathe, then I think it's on you to stop that particular technique, right?
Right. And as far as the neck is concerned, and this may be a stretch, but in the animal kingdom, the alpha animal, when he wants to discipline another animal, does it on the neck, bites on the neck. Like a mother cat, when she wants to move her kittens, she takes them by the back of the neck and actually moves them. So I would think it's a real old memory.
Exactly.
Coming from the animal kingdom.
I mean, it's sort of like in our Intro to Judaism class, we're discussing Brit Milah, the bris. And somehow the reform movement in the beginning, during classical reform, jettisoned all the ritual mitzvot except for that one. And, I don't know what the reason is, but I also imagine that it must be some deep sense of this is, the mark of the covenant, and, it's important on some really, really basic level, and, it's almost a primitive level. I don't know, but it's just interesting that even though it was referred to by several founding rabbis of Reform Judaism as barbaric, it was never, thrown out as one of the mitzvot that you need to follow. So some things are really deep. Now, something interesting in what we're reading right now is that, okay, all these kings have to be killed, right? Because we don't want them to mobilize again and unite. You're going to notice that there are no Jewish casualties whatsoever, right? No Jewish casualties. Miraculous. All right, let's go back to the text.
Now, okay. And Joshua said to them, do not be afraid or dismayed. Be strong and courageous, for thus the Lord will do to all the enemies against whom you fight. Afterward, Joshua struck them down and put them to death, and he hung them on 5 trees, and they hung on the trees until evening. At sunset, Joshua commanded, and they took them down from the trees and threw them into the cave where they had hidden themselves. They set large stones against the mouth of the cave, which remain to this very day. Sounds like Jesus in the after the crucifixion into the cave with this.
Interesting, yeah.
Okay, wait a minute. And Joshua took Makkedah on that day and struck it and its king with the edge of the sword, and he utterly destroyed every person in it, and he left no one remaining. And he did to the king of Makkedah as he had done to the king of Jericho. Then Joshua passed on from Makkedah, and all Israel with him, to Libnah, and fought against Libnah. The Lord gave it also and its king into the hand of Israel, and he struck it with the edge of the sword and every person in it. He left no one remaining in it. And he did so, a lot of violence here. And he did as he had done to the king of Jericho. Next, Joshua passed on from Libnah and all Israel with him to Lachish, and laid siege to it and assaulted it. The Lord gave Lachish into the hand of Israel, and he took it on the second day and struck it with the edge of the sword and every person in it, as he had done to Libnah. Then King Horam of Gezer came to help Lachish, and Joshua struck him and his people, leaving no survivors. From Lachish, Joshua passed on with all Israel to Eglon, and they laid siege to it and assaulted it. And they took it that day and struck it with the edge of the sword and every person in it. He utterly destroyed that day, as he had done to Lachish. Then Joshua went up with all Israel from Eglon to Hebron. They assaulted it and took it and struck it with the edge of the sword, and its king and its towns and every person in it. And he left no one remaining, just as he had done to Eglon, and utterly destroyed it with every person in it. Then Joshua with all Israel turned back to Debir and assaulted it. And he took it with his king and all its towns. They struck them at the edge of their sword and utterly destroyed every person in it, and left no one remaining, just as he had done to Hebron, and as he had done to Libnah and its king, so he did to Debir and its king. So Joshua defeated the whole land, the hill country and the Negeb, and the lowlands and the slopes, and all their kings. He left no one remaining, but utterly destroyed all that breathed, as the God of Israel had commanded. And Joshua defeated them from Kadesh Barnea to Gaza, and all the country of Goshen as far as Gibeon. And Joshua took all these kings and their land at one time, because the Lord God of Israel fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned, and all Israel with him, to the camp at Gilgal.
Okay, so
A lot of genocide going on here.
What's that?
A lot of genocide going on here.
Yeah. So that's the Southern conquest.
Right, Rabbi, excuse me, please.
Yes.
I just got company. I have to leave.
All right. Well, have a good time.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
So this was the Southern conquest. And then the next chapter is going to be the Northern conquest. And you see that, there's virtually no opposition to them, right? They're just whipping through with their swords. God's giving them all the land. And the cities and farms that are left behind are for the Israelites to, live from. I have to say, this book is not all that scintillating unless you're really into battle stories. We're going to be done with it fairly soon, because most of the second part of the book is really just land distribution, which, we can all read on our own. It's not, not a lot to discuss about it. But
I'm curious about something.
I'm sorry, what?
Oh, I'm curious about something. We've seen all through the Torah that there are times when God takes action on God's own will and brings plague or brings flood or brings other destruction directly from God's activity, right? We even see it in here with the stones, right? But then in this case, he has told them that they have to one by one slaughter people in combat, which strikes me as a very different way of clearing the land than God is capable of doing in other places. So, you know, if we try not to have arguments about inconsistency, but look at this as having a purpose, then it's asking, you know, what is the reason that the Israelites had to kill all these people one by one in violent fashion, as opposed to entering a valley that had been removed of its people by God's hand, right? Like there's something about this story that needs to be this way, and I'm trying to figure out what it is. I'm sort of, it's an open-ended question. I don't have the answer. But like, is it something that was written later as a way of explaining their presence with conquest and ferocity, as a way of feeling heroic and powerful, as opposed to something where they just walked into territory that God cleared out for them? You know, I'm wondering if they just needed a story where they were the conquering, as opposed to having come from slavery and having wandered. Now they were, you know, heroic and strong. I don't know, but there's a reason why we pick the stories we pick, right?
Right.
This story probably had very little accuracy in history, so it was retold for a reason, right?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get at,
well, I think,
why.
yeah, I mean, I think, look, who knows, but I think you're hinting at the reason. As I said, when we first started reading this is the idealized version of entering the land, because you'll see in the book of Judges, a lot of these places are still around. A lot of these kings are still alive. It's a much more interesting book too, because there's a lot more than just battle. But anyway, I think they want to feel like God's on their side. I mean, I hate to compare it to, let's say, jihad or something, but, you know, God's on our side, and, you know, they're winning. As long as they obey God, as long as they, you know, commit to the covenant with God, God is going to make them win all the battles. You know, surprising people both by, you know, the human strategy and somehow by the strategy of God. And it's a way to show that they're favored by God. Which, you know.
But also, oh, I'm sorry, Rabbi.
No, I was just going to say, yeah.
Go ahead. No, finish your thought.
No, I was just going to say that, you know, for us, it's kind of horrifying, but I think for them, this was something to be proud of. You know, look at, we conquered the land. God was behind us. We were able to wipe everybody out. And the fact is, it's very, very important to create this new people called Israel, to distinguish them from the local Canaanites and all of their, and they don't want, God does not want the influence of these Canaanites on the Israelites. Go ahead, Jane. And then there's a question that Jenny put in the chat. I'll get to that. Yeah, go ahead, Jane.
I think Jason really has a point. And I think one of the points is that Israel has to fight for its land. I mean, that's really, really clear. You just can't have God handing it to them. I mean, you have these promises and these covenants and over and over again, but at a certain point, you really have to fight for it yourself. And I couldn't help but notice that one of the places, Makedah, sounds an awful lot like Akedah, where there would have been complete slaughter. This is the binding of Isaac. And I was just wondering if that was actually a real place, or are they actually playing on words here? Were the rabbis playing on words when this was written? But that's just, you know, one of my crazy off the shoulder.
I didn't see anything about that, but
yeah.
Okay, so Stacey,
and I think what you said, that they have to differentiate themselves. They have to differentiate themselves not only to themselves from the people who had been in the desert, but they also have to differentiate themselves from the Canaanites, because they were very much a part of Canaanite culture.
Right,
and
that's exactly right.
Come into this land they
No,
have
that's
to come into this land being feared. Otherwise, you know, otherwise they've got no cachet.
Yeah,
Doing is
no,
fighting,
absolutely. No,
fighting,
they definitely have
fighting,
to be
fighting.
distinguished.
Con-
Definitely had to be distinguished from the Canaanites, and yes, be feared. That's a good point. And yes, Stacy, I think this is about establishing land ownership, which persists to this day. So Jenny was asking for me to review the ways in which this violence can be understood. So my 3 strategies are: number 1, problematize the text. It is a problematic text. No question, no hiding. And you just admit it. Yeah, it's problematic. We all have problematic texts in our traditions. Number 2, historicize it. So this was written a long time ago. This is how people understood their birthright of, you know, the land of Israel. There's still people today who believe in, you know, this kind of way of solving problems. But it was written at a certain time. It was an understanding that people had at that time of what God wanted. It's their understanding of what God wanted. It isn't necessarily God wanting this. And then I also try to not read it literally and read it on a more sort of spiritual level, which is to look at this as eliminating the idolatry within us. So the Canaanites represent idolatry, and we want to eliminate the idolatry in us, idolizing power or money or sneakers or whatever. So I don't know if that helps. Does that help at all? Okay. This is definitely not a book to be terribly proud of. Deuteronomy includes a lot of this as well, right? They're actually following through on what the book of Deuteronomy has said they're going to have to do. Okay, let's see if we can just read a little bit of chapter 11. So this is now going to be the northern conquest. Chapter 10 was the southern conquest. So they're going to be parallels. Okay, does somebody want to read this?
when King Jabin of Hazor heard of this, he sent to King Jobab of Madon, to the king of Shimron, to the king of Akshaph, and to the kings who were in the northern hill country, and in the Arabah south of Chinarath, and in the lowland, and in Naphoth Dor on the west, to the Canaanites in the east and the west, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, and the Jebusites in the hill country, and the Hivites under Hermon in the land of Mizpah. They came out with all their troops, a great army, in number like the sand on the seashore. Hey, an actual nice turn of phrase. With very many horses and chariots. All these kings joined their forces and came and camped together at the waters of Merom to fight with Israel. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, for tomorrow at this time I will hand over all of them slain to Israel. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire."
Okay, please stop and stop sharing, because there's a lot of stuff in that beginning there. So Hazor was a very important center and a big city, except not at the time of this conquest. So it represents an important center, but it's no longer what it was once upon a time by the time we get here. But it's significant. It's significant to capture it because it's an important city, and it's obviously the one who, got all the other nations to fight as well. Now, do you guys know what hamstringing a horse is? I didn't either, so I looked it
Isn't
up.
it cutting the tendon?
muscle.
It's cutting the Achilles tendon, isn't it?
It's the tendon in the hamstring, wherever that is. Yeah. No, I wasn't sure because I've heard the expression, but then I realized I don't really know what it means. It's pretty cruel, and it's a way to stop the horse from being useful. And apparently the reason that they are doing this, of course, God tells them to do it, but aside from that, is that, remember in Deuteronomy, when the people want a king, Deuteronomy is very, very opposed to a king. And the warning is that the king is going to do what? Anybody remember what the warning is against getting a king? And what Deuteronomy says the king is supposed to spend his time doing.
I know
So
he's supposed to spend his time writing a Torah.
Exactly. He's supposed to spend his time writing a Torah. And that's it. Carrying the Constitution around with you, right? Okay. So so the king, they're very worried about the king ending up imposing taxes and corvée, which is forced labor, and enriching himself, which all the things that end up happening when Solomon is king. So having a chariot and chariots and horses is, number one, something that is basically forbidden for the king to have horses. Remember, it says you're not allowed to bring horses in from Egypt. And it's a way to make sure that the people don't rely on their own military prowess and their own military equipment, through chariots and horses, that they realize that any victory is through God. And so that's why they're told to do this. But as I said, it's a very cruel thing to do, and it's pretty upsetting that this is what the order is. Then another interesting thing is that they're supposed to do this in this place called Merom, which is 4,000 feet above sea level, which means that it would have been very difficult to maneuver these chariots up there. And of course, it's because of God's intervention that they're actually able to fight and win this battle. But also because up there, it's pretty hard to maneuver your chariots. And Deuteronomy also said that the Israelites would live in cities that they had not built. And that's exactly what these cities are that are abandoned during the battle, that they're allowed to hang on to, except for, the couple of cities that had to be completely leveled, like Ai and Jericho, but some of these other cities are allowed to hang on to. And what we're going to see, and this is to your point, Stacy, about the land, and that is that, Abraham was able to negotiate for a little bit of not even really land, a cave in which to bury his wife. And he negotiated and insisted on paying for it, so there'd be a claim to the land. And now we've got the entire land being taken over by Joshua. And it's going to be a long journey of fighting. They're only going to highlight a few of the fights, and it doesn't seem like it's taking that much time, but it is going to take a long time, as we'll discover. And it's taking longer than it needs to take, apparently because Joshua feels like the Israelites will not be punished and will not sin as long as he's alive. So the longer he, keeps the campaign going, the less likely it is that the Israelites are going to be punished. Because once he's conquered the land, he's done his job and it's time for him to go. So I think we should probably stop here just because I don't want to start a whole new discussion. But if anybody has any questions or comments before we go.
So later on in Jerusalem, David takes it back.
Yes.
So the Jews are already there though, right?
Well, that's the point, is that the Jebusites rule over Jerusalem and they don't take it over right here. It's much later.
Oh.
Yeah. As I said, as we read the rest, especially the book of Judges, but in other places too, you'll see, oh, I thought this place was conquered. I thought this place was destroyed or this king was dead, but guess what? No, he's still alive and this place has still not been conquered. I want to just mention a couple things that are coming up. Oh, did you have a question or comment, Mickey?
Yeah,
please.
There's no mention of any Israelite casualties in these battles.
Right, exactly.
All about it. Have they been protected?
God's protecting them so nobody dies.
Wow.
Pretty unlikely, right?
Yeah.
As I said, this is the so-called idealized version of the conquest, but it's not the real version or a realistic version. Very unrealistic that there'd be no casualties, except for the guy who was stoned to death for taking some booty. Remember him?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so tomorrow at 10 a.m., Rabbi Laura Geller, Emerita of Temple Emmanuel in Beverly Hills, is going to talk about aging with grace. And then next Saturday morning at 10, rather than Torah study, Howard Rubin is going to do a meditation, sort of guided meditation, Torah study kind of thing at 10 a.m. And then we'll have Torah study again the following Saturday, the 20th. Any final comments before we sign off?
Just if any of you have never met or heard Rabbi Geller, she's wonderful. Unfortunately, I have a Musar group at the same time, but I actually studied. She was in a group which she actually hosted in her home years ago. I mean, this is like 12 years ago, but she was a fascinating person to spend time with. And if you were at all wondering about if you don't know her, I would certainly say if you have the time, she'd be very much worth tuning in for.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, she's very smart. She's very interesting. And she, was a senior rabbi of a major temple as a woman way before women were senior rabbis. So definitely worth it.
And her husband is fascinating too, Richard, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, he's no longer alive.
Oh, I didn't.
Oh, you didn't know that? Yeah, they wrote this book together about aging, which I have somewhere around here.
Okay.
Thank you, Randy,